Good morning, vinyl community. I'm here to read out a chapter. It's called How to Stage a Hollywood Murder. Take one. The Ghosts of Harlow's Haunted Mansion. It suited Sebring's self-image to take up conspicuous residence in a landmark 1920s estate at 9810 Easton Drive. The LAPD later learned that was so indebted at the time that his death that he really couldn't afford the place. The mansion was under another expensive prop in the carefully choreographed Sebring show. As a police report written after his death noted, Sebring put up a big front, living in a large house with a butler and expensive foreign car, and at times hosting expensive parties. It is believed that all these actions were so impressed potential backers of his corporations in his financial worth, while in fact his capital resources were very limited. 36 years before the messy results of the Candyman's final negotiation made the Easton Drive mansion infamous all over again. It had been the scene of an earlier Hollywood crime sensation. In 1932, the screenwriter Paul Byrne, husband of movie star Jean Harlow, was reported to have killed himself there, just as Rudy Antebelli was responded to ghostly show guest Sebring's bloodstained at Cielo Drive. Sebring liked to play up the macabre history of the house he rented. He also liked to boast to his closer friends about the knowledge of what had really happened to Byrne. The tale he told is more diversifying than Tinseltown gossip. It was far a greater distinct significance to Sebring's own fate than has previously been understood. In fact, what happened with Harlow and Byrne was a blueprint for Hollywood's posthumous handling of Tate and Sebring. The earlier Easton Drive event cast so much long shadows on the murders of its later residents, it's a tangled tale worth recounting in some detail. Sharon Tate's near wedding to the mob was just the latest chapter in an old Hollywood tradition. Jean Harlow, another blonde sexpot with the taste of dangerous swains, was one of the first movie stars to form a coalition with the underworld. Harlow's domineering Christian Scientist mother, also named Jean, set this long fatal chain of events into motion. After she dictated Harlow's father to move to mob capital Chicago in 1923, Mama Jean tried to knot with hoodlum Mariano Bello. He jumped at the potentially remunerative Hollywood family connection like a shark grabbing bait. At the height of his prohibition crime wave that brought Manson's underworld mentor Alvin Karpis to the prominence, Harlow started in a mob epic entitled The Public Enemy. Proceeding to be a warning about gangland powers growing power, The Public Enemy helped to romanticize the American gangster image. No wonder Harlow's syndicate stepfather served as a Rosa technical advisor for the crime thriller. During the shoot, the matchmaker Bello introduced stepfather Harlow to his personal friend, Al Scarface Capone. But Harlow only had eyes for Capone's bodyguard, the vicious but charming Abraham Longy Zwillman. We've heard that name before here, if you'd followed me. Gossip columnists seized on the movie star and mobster complete as a scandalous item, and it was through the romance that the mob outfit, ruled at the time by Lucky Luciano, first got a tip grip on the Hollywood strings they pulled, and sometimes used as a garrote. From then on, Longy convinced Columbia studio chief Harry S. Cohn that he would be good for his health to sign Harlow to his contract. A star was born. In so doing, Zwillman claimed that Hollywood studios at the family turf for the syndicate, would employ Jay Sebring the 3 decades later. At the same time, the related New York mob moved west to the flamboyant persona of Benjamin Bugsy Siegel, sportsman, hotelier, and much else besides. From his headquarters in Las Vegas, a town he put on the map, Siegel would order the 1936 hit on Harlow's fellow movie star Thelma Toddy, the Hot Toddy, Thelma Todd, close associate of Siegel's in Las Vegas, gambling with Frankie Carbo, who would later be one of links between Lino LaBianca and Manson. In 1947, Longy Zwillman was one of the chairmen of the Murder Incorporated board, who decided it would be best for business to be erratic Bugsy was rubbed out. Frankie Carbo was assigned to plan the hit. In 1932, Zwillman was still Bugsy's loyal lieutenant in L.A. as Longy introduced to gal Jean Harlow to Bugsy. Harlow was so taken with the suave thug that she profoundly accepted the honor of becoming godmother to Siegel's daughter. This cemented her an image to the syndicate-owned sweetheart of the silver screen. Utterly immoral MGM mogul Louis B. Mayer, who brought Harlow out from Colombia, had no problem with organized crime. If he didn't want his innocent movie stars being thought of as a gangster's gun moles by the audience, to correct this all too accurate impression, Mayer arranged for Harlow's show marriage with MGM screenwriter Paul Byrne, a trusted studio tool. Longy Zwillman, still Harlow's lover, didn't care for this development, as you can be imagined. One of little over 2 months after the happy occasion, Byrne's death became front-page news in Hollywood, where they were rare. Byrne passed for an intellectual. His friend Adele Rogers St. John's called him as being interested in abnormality and complexities in inhibitions, perversion, suicide, and death. The Moody Neurotics library included several rare volumes devoted to fetishes, especially sadomasochism. Byrne would have been found the latent tenant at Easton Drive, J. Sebring, an interesting case. At the firm police report investigating the Cielo murders, described Sebring, he would tie the women up with a small cash cord, and if they agreed, would whip them, and which he would undress them and have sexual relations. But there was more than Byrne was capable of. The man who married Hollywood's most desired sex symbol was fascinating with studying the extremes of erotic behavior and was apparently so inhibited that he incapable of having sex. Actress Lettice Joy, who once saw Byrne nude, said that his penis was the size of a pinky. On her wedding night at Easton Drive, Harlow didn't even discover that shortening before her new husband explained, "Sex is not the most important thing in our lives." On September 3rd, with 2 days to live, Byrne submitted a plot synopsis for a proposed Clark Gable movie to MGM Studios, in which the matinee idol dies by being tortured. Byrne was last seen dining with friends at the Ambassador Hotel, where Bobby Kennedy would be shot and the LaBianca trial would be sequestered. He returned to Easton Drive and curled up with a few books of obvious psychic renaissance for him. Discourse of the worship of Priapus, the glands relating personality, and Schopenhauer's The Biology Tragedy of Women. John Carmichael's Harlow's butler heard a big fight between the employers about Marino Bello, the mob married to Harlow's mother. Bello was eagerly for Ben and Harlow to deed them the Easton Drive house. In other words, Bello wanted the house for the mob. Ben refused. Furious, he insisted that Harlow get out. He was then seen leaving in tears at 11:30 a.m. on September 5th, 32, Labor Day. A naked Paul Byrne was found doubled up before a mirror on the floor of his bedroom. There was a bullet in his head. In 1969, when Sebring was discovered at Cielo Drive, a servant named Winifred Chapman was the first to report the murders. In 1932, a servant named Winifred Carmichael knew not to call the police. She notified Jean Harlow's mother, who then called MGM mogul Louis B. Mayer. The law could wait. The death of the husband of the studio's biggest female star was a studio matter. The first to arrive at Easton Drive was Virgil Apker, a studio photographer who snapped the photos of the corpse. In a guest book he borrowed while searching for clues, Apker came across a cryptic note on page 13. "Dearest dear, unfortunately, this is the only way to make a good the rightful wrong I have done to you and to wipe out my abject humiliation. I love you, Paul. You understand, last night was only a comedy. What really meant nobody ever knew, but it fit into Hollywood's script perfectly. Louis B. Mayer arrived on the scene with MGM publicity department head Howard Strickling, and that was the grandfather's boss. Mayer wanted to destroy the message. Strickling had a better PR idea. On the page, as a suicide note, otherwise Harlow could be suspended of murdering her husband. That couldn't possibly be good for business. The guest book was left open on page 13 to suggest that it was a suicide note. It never was. MGM executive Irving Thalberg, his wife was the silent movie star Norma Shearer, who I met at the acting retirement home in Thousand Oaks when I was a teenager. She said, "Steve, you're never going to be able to work in the business." I guess she was right to a degree. And David O. Selznick joined the impromptu wake and set dressing party. The studio bigwigs cleaned up and brainstormed on damage control strategies. Newspaper reporters have learned of the commission on Easton Drive was kept waiting outside. Almost 3 hours later, Thalberg finally got around to notifying the police. Marino Bello off fishing with his friend Clark Gable at a time of the body's discovery. Does that make my grandpa mobbed up? I don't know. Was remarkably unmoved when he heard the news of his stepdaughter's husband's death. Police detectives, already fairly certain that the crime scene had been tampered with, finally arrived. They pried a .38 revolver from Burns' still fingers. A full hour later, after the husband's death, Jean Harlow was informed of her mysterious loss by Irving Thalberg, the head of MGM. She went into shock, or head of productions. She went into shock and was sedated. The servants at Easton Drive, meanwhile, followed studio instructions that denied that there was ever a fight between Ben and Harlow, except for Clifton Davis, the gardener. He described the argument in detail, including a part of Bellows wanting Harlow's house to deed to him. He also mentioned a new detail, his limousine arriving and speding away in a hurry on the night of Burns' death. Marino Bello personally advised the chatty gardener that it would be wise to forget all of that. By the time the police got into interviewing Davis, he no longer recalled a fight, a deed, or a limousine. Clark Gable would have heard plenty from Mario Bello, but couldn't recall anything of interest. Sending a cover-up, however, public opinion turned against the bereaved widow Harlow. The same hothouse atmosphere of rumor and hysterical conjecture that later followed Sebring's death took hold. The favorite gossip was that Jean Harlan shot her husband. Louis B. Mayer forced Harlow to put on a special performance, publicly admitting that her marriage was never consummated. Physicians were recruited to arrest Ben's suicidal depression. A coroner inquest faithfully reported MGM's satinized version of reality, a suicide. In Los Angeles, one police officer's vigorous objections to the miscarriage of justice didn't carry out the height of Louis B. Mayer's command. Was the cover-up? What was covered up exactly? The malicious Longy Zwillman hated the fake marriage arrangement between Mayer had forced Harlow to play along with. Burns' refusal to give the Easton Drive house to the mob was the last straw. Longy discovered that Byrne had a mentally ill common life wah named Dorothy Millette back in the East Coast. She was pathologically and conveniently jealous of Harlow. The cunning Longy, no longer not wishing to get his hands dirty, sent Dorothy to Easton Drive with a loaded gun, which he provided. He was also saw to it that the scorned and unstable Millette was given a key to the house. After shooting Burns, she was spirited away in that big limousine which the Easton Drive gardener had seen rushing away. Having expended her usefulness, Millette was soon fished out of the Sacramento River. No more of a suicide than Paul Byrne had been. With the help of Hollywood's mogul, Longy Zwillman got away with murder. We sent on to live a long life of crime. In 1959, he was found hung by an electric cord in his New Jersey Manson. The coroner called Longy's goodbye a suicide, too. Some of the associates said that they knew better. 10 years after Zulman's demise, Jay Sebring was still telling his guests the secret tale of Paul Byrne's death. He gloated over the gory details, showed his friends the little room where Byrne's corpse was dressed and as suicide by Hollywood's master illusionist in order to save them own hides. Sebring might have been so amused that he had known that this excised chapter of Hollywood's ugliest hidden history would repeat itself at 9810 Easton Drive on August morning when he was killed. Just as they had in 1932, the movie industry would marshal in forces to conceal evidence. They invaded another reputation and torture covering the story, and it was a muzzled legal embellishments completed and crucial extended was suppressed. Yet again, Hollywood and the mob colluded to successfully put forth a scenario to make one crime look like another. As we probably deduced by now, it was far more a coincidence that Jay Sebring could have come to live at the house Mariano Bello wanted to so badly 3 decades earlier. When Jean Harlow died of uremic poisoning in 1936, friend of the family Zwillman handled her estate, including her Easton Drive mansion. From then on, the house was administered to the property of Lucky Luciano Costello Syndicate that later became known as the Genovese family. And these luxurious digs stayed in the family business when Jay Sebring moved in. Literally, the family business there, Sebring bought vast quantities of drugs from Joel Rostow, was boss with Ruggiero Richie the Boot Bodiero. Richie the Boot's boss was Gerardo Jerry Catania, who answered only to Luciano and Costello's successor, Vito Genovese himself, and Catania owned his position in the mob to the deadly favor granted by Harlow's former beau, Longy Zwillman. As mentioned, to burnish his rep as a heavy-duty player, Rostow's even told associates he was Longy Zwillman's nephew. This wasn't the case. Hollywood's clever handling of the Paul Byrne hit deserved an Oscar for Best Cover-Up of a Murder, but the later and far more complex series of performances was buried the truth about the Tate LaBianca killings is worthy of some kind of special achievement service to the industry award. Sharon, in her new mistress of Easton Drive, took an interest in the house's sordid history. Presumably, Sebring would have told her that the true circumstances of Byrne's execution. In an interview Tate gave journalist Dick Kleiner some 2 years before her death, the actress described an uncanny incident that happened there. When she got up to go to the bathroom one night, she said, "I saw this creepy little man. He looked like all the descriptions I had ever read of Paul Byrne." Accompanying Byrne's ghost of Hollywood past was the ghost of Hollywood's future. The special secret figure throat Sharon said she saw was slashed from ear to ear, a wound which splashed phantom blood on the floor. Sharon thought it was Sebring himself. She was relieved to find him sleeping safe and sound in his bedroom. Once Sharon and Jay had set up their haunted house, Easton Drive became a must for the more advantageous edges of the Hollywood crime scene. What LSD was still, Sharon and Sebring's sang for the praise of psychedelia, encouraging everyone to turn on. When acid was illegal in 1966, Sebring quickly added to the other wares he sold in such quantity to his friends and clients. Surprisingly, the former bohemian Sharon took to her domestic duties, but with a twist. She never knew what condition you'd end up in after an invitation to lunch with the wacky kids, Sharon and Jay. One of the specialties she whipped up in Easton Drive kitchen was her famous hash brownie space cakes. She also devised an especially potent marijuana salad dressing, which was served to unwary guests by Sebring's black butler, Amos Russell. Prized by Sebring for his collection, Russell could be counted on to stay silent about much of what he heard at the horror of eccentric employee he always called Mr. J. And when the police arrived with the unassuming butler after Mr. J's murder, Russell was the only one in Sebring's social circle to be honest about the cover-up that took place at Easton Drive. In the hours after word of the killing got out, the details he revealed were so damning that not a word of what he told the police was ever heard in court. In 1965, when Sebring and Tate were living in the Easton house, Jean Harlow employed a posthumous revival. That year, no less than 2 biopics about Jean Harlow were released. In part of Paul Byrne was Sebring's friend and client, Peter Lawford, a key figure in the Maryland JFK bugging and drugging affair. Harlow's mother was placed by Angela Lansbury, the actress who later agreed to play her daughter, Dee Dee, in Manson's guardianship. This is just amazing. I'll read this little bottom part here. Sebring and Tate, former occupants of the Haunted Mansion, were murdered by the same day that the Disneyland Park ride called the Haunted Mansion was officially open to the public. Visitors to the Haunted Mansion are convinced by vehicles called dune buggies that Manson's vehicles are dune buggies in the desert. Well-to-be-known aspects of their legend. The last animaniac ghost was upon leaving the Haunted Mansion is a small, long-haired, bearded, hitchhiking prisoner that claims which to be easily to be mistaken for the character of Charlie Manson. That's the last of this chapter. I hope we keep learning about the characters of all these people so that one day the zeitgeist of the world will come to the truth. The next chapter is still about J. Sebring. It's called Hanging Out with Mr. J. Thank you guys for speaking the truth. Peace, everyone, and pray for the children.